Hello and welcome to this video episode of All Things Policy, your favorite daily podcast from the Takshashila Institution. My name is Shubhankita and I'm a research analyst with the High-Tech Geopolitics program at the Takshashila Institution. I'll be your host for the day. I'm joined by Aishwarya Sunavne, our researcher in Pakistan studies. Aishwarya also writes the bi-monthly newsletter tracking developments in Pakistan called the Pakistan Paigam. I would urge you, dear listener, to go follow that. Welcome to this episode, Aishwarya.
Thank you for having me, Shubhankita. Thank you so much.
So, Aishwarya, I thought it would be helpful in this episode to really declutter and understand what's recently been top of all our minds, specifically Operation Sindoor, following the Pahalgam terrorist attack, and also the escalations across the line of control and just everything that we've been sort of trying to piece together from the latest developments. So, my first query to you really is, how has India's approach to terrorism from Pakistan seen a shift or change over the last decade or so, right? So we've had Uri, then we have had Pulwama and now Pahalgam, and there has definitely been an escalatory shift. So if you could maybe double down and help us understand what that change is.
So there has definitely been a transformation in India's cross-border response, especially in the last half a decade that we've seen. India has effectively moved from any sort of diplomatic condemnation or international pressure to a military response. This is something that we saw in 2016, the surgical strikes that followed the Uri attack, which was further reinforced in 2019 with the Balakot strikes. And now with Operation Sindoor in 2025, I think the Indian military has effectively sort of redefined and stated its military strategy. We saw this with each operation marked sort of an operational escalation. In 2016, the Indian military strikes were conducted near the line of control. This moved from the line of control where in 2019 the Balakot strikes were conducted beyond the international border. And with Operation Sindoor, Indian military strikes were hit deep in Punjab, especially in symbolic symbolic locations like Murid-Ke and Bawalpur in Punjab, which were previously known to be escalatory in nature.
Yeah.
So I think India has expanded its geographical scope. This essentially marks a departure from India's previous position of restraint to an overt military response to even subconventional or terrorist attacks. India basically saying that every subconventional terrorist attack will be met with a conventional military response, effectively putting the burden on Pakistan that India's intentions are quite clear now, that if an attack is being conducted by groups based out of Pakistan, India will have a military response to this. What strikes me the most interesting in this is India's publicly stated intention of launching these attacks, right? Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in a public rally in Bihar, stated that the terrorists based out of Pakistan will be brought to justice. So these strikes are not covert anymore. These are well publicized and not, I wouldn't just call it an evolution in India's military strategy, but it has now evolved to also become a political compulsion where the public now expects Indian military to have a strong retaliatory response to a terrorist attack, especially in Kashmir.
Yeah, military escalations for sure, and an expansion in geography, an expansion in the targets being selected after these terrorist attacks. But that must entail higher risks. So what are these risks and what new targets have been targeted?
Right. So India's earlier targets, like I mentioned, were confined to terrorist launch pads closer to the line of control, which has now shifted to high value, symbolic, and operationally significant assets, right? In recent operations, we've seen that India targeted Pakistani military bases, air defense installations were targeted. Um, Significant terrorist headquarters in Muridke and Bawalpur, which, like I said, were previously considered to be too escalatory in nature. But India has effectively, with these strikes, stated its intention that every attack will be met with a most stringent response. So this sort of sets a new precedent for depth and risk of these attacks. Although I would still say that these attacks were calibrated. These were calibrated in nature. India also specifically stated that they were only targeting terrorist infrastructure. No civilian or economic infrastructure was targeted in any of these strikes. However, there is this tit for tat loop that these attacks create, where both sides feel pressured to act and retaliate more decisively and swiftly to every response. So there is always a risk of miscalculation, and these risks of miscalculations are further amplified under the influence of real-time social media updates, wartime fog, political pressures in India, military pressures in Pakistan. We saw that Asim Munir arguably had lost a lot of popularity in Pakistan following the arrest and imprisonment of Imran Khan. So for him, it almost became like a survival tactic,
A distraction.
a distraction, a survival necessity to respond decisively to India. So the combination of drone strikes, um, unclear communication, also the absolute absence of any sort of back channel negotiations reduces the margin for, let's say, any diplomatic intervention or a bilateral negotiation to halt these hostilities in the immediate term. So there definitely is a risk of miscalculation in these sort of military confrontations.
Yeah. And since you mentioned drones, drones were used sort of extensively in this warfare, right? So, what do we sort of understand from that? What are the implications of using drones? Because the last time I'd heard of drones extensively was more so by Israel, but we saw that sort of being played out here across our borders as well. So, what does this mean in the changing shifts for warfare generally?
Right. I read a couple of articles where they said that both India and Pakistan are making notes from the Ukraine-Russia war, where drone warfare was extensively seen. This conflict definitely was different from any sort of previous military confrontations between India and Pakistan. It was the first large-scale use of unmanned vehicles for surveillance, for electronic intelligence gathering, jamming, and precision strikes. I think both India and Pakistan deployed drones where India used allegedly, while India has not come out and given details on what drones were used, but according to reports, Israel origin Harop drones were used by India. These loitering munitions are used for both precision strikes while for surveillance purposes, while Pakistan deployed Turkish drones, and also a few indigenous locally produced drones were used in swarm formations. Pakistan sent about 300 to 400 drones within 36 Indian cities. So these were multiple ways to sort of overwhelm the air defense systems, to understand the air defense systems while also conducting air precision strikes. So I think this fundamentally transforms the tempo and the character of escalation in these conflicts. What this means for future India-Pakistan conflicts, definitely we will see an increase in the use of drones, because that sort of mitigates the risk of using manned vehicles. Drones are also much lower in cost than the aircrafts use. There is no risk of losing a pilot, something that we saw in 2019. So drones sort of offer a way to conduct high-risk operations targeting critical infrastructure without risking pilots or escalating to a full-scale conventional war.
Yeah, yeah. I know it's quite early as of yet, but do we have anything about how India Pakistan might change their operational strategies? Any signals from the current escalation that tell us of future prospects there? And also about military procurement by both these nations, right?
Yes, after the current conflict, I think it's safe to say that drone procurement will definitely go higher. Both countries will seek to procure more unmanned vehicles. India is already procuring its weapons from Israel. So we could see more of this. India will probably focus on building indigenous drones. There are a few startups who already are working not just in the military sector but also in the commercial sector of procuring drones and bringing the unmanned vehicles more in the military arsenal of it. We will see that Pakistan is likely to double down on its ties with China and Turkey, both countries which are leading in their drone production. So, although we don't know exactly where both countries stand in terms of what ammunitions they have, but we should definitely see a rise in drone warfare, not just in combat but also for surveillance purposes, for commercial purposes. So that's a new area that will open doors for us to study, I suppose.
And I think there's value in studying this, particularly from an Indian perspective, also because many of these Pakistani military equipment is Chinese. So it sort of helps us understand their capabilities, what they're possible to even do, right? I mean, it's data also perhaps that China is collecting because they are not necessarily deployed at war, but it's data that helps them, and we should obviously be tracking military weapons and systems.
Right. So I know how international media is playing this into a Chinese equipment versus a Western equipment warfare. But I would be a little mindful in such oversimplification because even though the US has banned Pakistan from using the F-16s against combat with India, F-16 aircraft are only supposedly to be used for counterinsurgency operations. However, we have very little data of what weaponry was used. India also has a lot of Russian arsenal. So I wouldn't necessarily play it as a Western versus Chinese wrestle in this theater of India-Pakistan confrontation. I would wait to see what weapons were used. I think it's too early to make these arguments or these analyses unless we have more information on what kind of weapons were used by both countries.
Got it. Understood. Thanks for that. Another thing that kind of gets played up every time there's an escalation between India and Pakistan is the nuclear capabilities in both of these nations. And I think it gets played up not just in the domestic media, but also in the international community. So suicidal Pakistan, putting a gun to its own head, is it nuclear bluff? Is it deterrence? How much value do we sort of accord to this?
Right. I think nuclear deterrence continues to shape the psyche of international community. But India, especially through Operation Sindoor and through a calibrated kinetic response, has carved out a distinct space between conventional and subconventional warfare. One that signals that a military response will be warranted without breaching the nuclear threshold.
Yeah.
So this military doctrine only complicates Pakistan's strategic calculation, where it is bound to challenge the traditional assumptions about any sort of escalatory nuclear warfare in the Indian subcontinent. So I think to answer your question, yes, the nuclear deterrence, which is considered as a bluff in the Indian policy circles from Pakistan, I don't think it will hold much value anymore because, like I said, India has stated its intentions quite clearly that although it does not have an appetite for a full scale conventional war, its target are specifically terrorist infrastructure and potentially military establishments supporting these proxies.
Yeah, so there's subconventional warfare, which is subtle, which can be denied, and which is sort of been Pakistan's way of dealing with India and Kashmir. And then we have conventional war, and then we have a range of things between subconventional and conventional that India has sort of deployed, and the threshold for nuclear is way above.
Right.
So that's sort of the deterrence that holds everybody to sort of pull themselves together,
Yes.
and perhaps not escalate things beyond repair.
Right, it helps to it raises alarm within the international community, instantly calls for the need of mediation.
Correct.
So that's how the nuclear deterrence plays.
Right, right. One thing that surprised me about this was the sudden tweet from Donald Trump, sort of announcing the ceasefire and the mediation, as he called it. But one thing that's clear between, and also a difference between India and Pakistan in this aspect is that Pakistan wanted third-party mediation, but India was opposed to that. Is there a way to understand this? What are the motivations and incentives for both of these parties?
Right. So Pakistan has always called for third-party mediation. It is a part of Pakistan's strategy to sort of internationalize the Kashmir issue, while portraying India as the aggressor by sort of bringing out the human rights record that India has in Kashmir. So not just now, this is something that Pakistan has been speaking about in international platforms like the OIC, UN for years. However, India has always been against any sort of third-party mediation under the Simla Agreement, which calls for a bilateral resolution for the Kashmir dispute. India also sees it as a threat to its sovereignty and a threat to its territorial claims on Kashmir. So this isn't something new. India, however, having said that, I would say that while briefly Pakistan did manage to sort of bring Kashmir back into the international limelight, India has firmly opposed it, and we saw this. Although when Prime Minister Modi came out, nobody from the Indian government has explicitly spoken about a third-party mediation. So it's safe to assume that this third-party mediation was limited to bringing in a ceasefire agreement and possibly not further including dialogue on Kashmir.
Right.
While we are here, we saw that Shehbaz Sharif also welcomed this third-party mediation. Trump has gone far ahead and said that he will also mediate the Kashmir issue. But as precedent suggests, India will continue to reject any sort of third-party mediation on Kashmir, and it is not a new position. But having said that, it's not like it has never happened before. It seems like US seems to be the only acceptable country on both sides for any sort of mediation. We saw that there was the Tashkent Agreement of 1966 that happened by the former Soviet Union. We saw UN intervention in the Kargil War of 1999. So, third party diplomacy, I would say, has been crucial in limiting an escalation to a conventional war. But any sort of mediation on Kashmir, I, I don't see why India will now open up to it.
Right.
India has already has asserted its territorial claims on Kashmir, and by including a third party mediation, it puts India's position in threat.
Yeah, yeah. So, one of the things that you had mentioned previously was the complete absence of back channel negotiations or even talks, right? So, looks like, I mean, is it safe to say that things are worse now than they were before? What does it mean for political and diplomatic ties between India and Pakistan? I just want to pivot away from the military escalation and just look at what does this mean for relations in the near future?
So, if you talk about, so the recent escalation, I would say, has effectively frozen any sort of bilateral relationship that was between India and Pakistan. There was a lot of impasse in whatever back channel talks or track two dialogues that were held in recent years. Also, India unilaterally placed the Indus Water Treaty in abeyance, which was a non-kinetic measure. Visa regimes, cross-border movement was effectively halted by both sides. So I would say that while Pakistan, like I said, did succeed in momentarily bringing Kashmir to the international platform, India's actions has effectively shifted the focus on the water treaty and other bilateral agreements that were between India. I feel there is a need for effective back channel talks, which I don't see happening anytime soon. Tensions continue to remain high, not just between Islamabad and New Delhi, but the borders are still tense. The ceasefire did not include any sort of provisions on reinstating the Indus Water Treaty. So if negotiations are to be held, it would start with the Indus Water Treaty and not with Kashmir. So effectively, I don't think there will be any negotiations on Kashmir in the immediate future. There are some rumors that back channel talks have resumed to a certain degree, but I would still say there is an absolute absence of any sort of institutionalized mechanisms for bilateral talks between both countries. So yes, the deep freeze in diplomacy and weaponization of economic ties sort of reinforces the current nature of ties between India and Pakistan.
Yeah, yeah. So safe to say that things are worse now than they were before.
Yes, definitely, because right now there is an absolute absence of any sort of crisis management mechanisms. The fact that US had to intervene also goes to show, allegedly intervene, we don't have a confirmation from the Ministry of External Affairs yet, but also goes to show the high level of mistrust between India and Pakistan, which will take months, if not years, to bring both countries back to the table and start any sort of meaningful negotiations.
Yeah. So, what kind of a stage does this set for future escalations or de-escalations again, right? I mean, what are the future prospects across the line of control in Kashmir and just generally between the two nations, if you were to sort of project into the future and see what the future prospects were?
The risk of escalations, unfortunately, without mincing my words, I would say remain extremely high. There are several factors contributing to the precarious nature of these military tensions. Both nations have begun issuing public and preemptive statements about their red lines and intended responses. There are political and institutional pressures on both the military and political establishment, like I mentioned, in Pakistan and in India to have a tough response. The public perception in both countries is that the public in Pakistan believes that they have achieved their victories. Indian public believes that they have their own victories. We don't have the full picture yet. However, I would say that the blurred boundaries between terrorism and any sort of conventional military action means that the future crisis could escalate more quickly with much lesser warnings.
Yeah.
Despite third party efforts to mediate, particularly from the US, like I said, an absence of any sort of crisis management institutions, any back channel talks between the NSAs, or any high level delegations, stalemate interactive dialogues, makes the situation more challenging. There is immense mistrust on both sides. So I would say that the future for India-Pakistan ties remains bleak, to say the least.
Yeah. Aishwarya, thank you for the work that you do. And thank you for this conversation. I found it quite insightful. With that, we conclude this episode of All Things Policy. Make sure to tune in to our next episode.
And subscribe to Pakistan Paigam.
Yes.